Hi, Kendra. Delighted to be here with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much for the opportunity.
You've had such an impressive career. I'm really looking forward to hearing how things unfolded for you. And so let's talk about that. Where are you in your board career journey? And in what ways have you been deliberate in the mix of board appointments that you take on?
Yeah, so I've been serving on boards, doing the calculation, close to 20 years. And so about a dozen or so boards and a few advisory committees over that time. And mostly I have worked with or been on not-for-profit boards. And so most of my career, I was with Deloitte. I was with Deloitte almost 25 years, half of those as a partner. So that's fairly restrictive in terms of the boards that you can serve on. So in my day job, I worked with boards because I was a public company auditor, so external auditor, internal auditor. I was a board facilitator. I was also a consultant. And my final role with Deloitte was actually as chief audit executive. So I reported to our global audit committee for Deloitte. But personally, I couldn't serve on boards. So I left Deloitte about 4 years ago to take on the role of chief executive officer of the Ocean Supercluster. And so now I'm able to broaden out the boards that I work with. And now I serve on my first Crown Corporation board and looking for other board opportunities. So that's where I am. When I started, I wasn't particularly picky. I wanted the board experience, so took a lot that came my way. As my time has gotten more limited, and nice to see that the opportunities have gotten more frequent, I've had to really think about, who am I working with? Does it align with what I'm passionate about? Will it leverage the skills that I want to bring to it? Is there something that I can learn from it? Really, what can I give? And what is the value that it can bring so that we have a strong two-way relationship with that board experience.
Fascinating. So you've had a lot of different perspectives in terms of working with and being on boards. So what, in your view, what does an effective board member look like? And with all your experience, perhaps you can draw some comparisons between the boards and the different sectors that you've been on.
Yeah, so I think for me, an effective board member probably looks pretty similar no matter the sector and no matter the board. I think it is someone that is well prepared. And so, you really need to understand how much work, the frequency with which your boards meet. I've had some boards meet monthly, others meet quarterly. So really understanding the amount of preparation and being prepared. Someone that asks thoughtful questions that really extends the thinking of management, but at the same time doesn't make management feel bad, which can sometimes happen depending on how you ask a question. So I think that's incredibly important because that's the job of the board, is really to help stretch and help management in terms of their thinking. Someone that doesn't dominate the conversation. Nothing more frustrating in a board meeting if you've got someone that's doing all the talking and making it really difficult for others to be able to chime in. That understands their role, so noses in and fingers out, so they're able to provide that input at the right level. So I think those skills are the same no matter, they have a different flavor, but they're pretty much the same no matter what board or sector you're serving on.
Interesting point. And you talked about being part of your journey and transitioning from not-for-profit boards and into crowns. Perhaps you can elaborate on that a little bit more in terms of how did that come about and how did you make it happen?
Yeah, so a couple years ago when I brought my head up a little bit from my new role, I realized, hey, I can actually get more involved and more broadly involved in boards, and that is part of actually my role at Deloitte that I miss. I really enjoyed working with boards, although my own board does keep me quite busy as well. And so, I actually started by talking to people and getting some advice from others that had been on that journey, that served on corporate boards. And so a few pieces of advice really resonated with me. Certainly one of them was make sure you have your name out there. So there's lots of different channels to do that, whether that's Institute of Corporate Directors or women getting on boards, or your LinkedIn profile. Like, make sure that you are findable in terms of your profile. And the other piece of advice was, don't just necessarily jump to corporate boards. Crown corporations can give you some really good experience they're fairly professional boards. And so think about that as an interim step. And the other one was make sure you talk to lots of people. So make sure at least 30 people in your network, was the number I was given, know that you're interested in getting on board. So I started reaching through my LinkedIn. I reached to colleagues I hadn't spoken to in 15 or 20 years and said, hey, can we have a chat? I see you're sitting on these boards. I'd love to understand how you did that. I'd love some advice. I started talking to board recruiters and getting their perspectives on what the CV should look like, and really started to narrow down on what I wanted to do. So the Crown Corporation was application process. So typically the provinces have a process. The federal government has a process as well. And so put my name into that process. And then at the same time on the corporate side, although I'm not quite there yet, really treating that as another job search. So what are the sectors you're interested in? What are the boards that would be of interest? Who is sitting on those boards? What conversations can you have? How do you put that together? So that's where I am now.
Okay. The bridge of mutually beneficial fit, really. Excellent. And so now that you've had so much experience working with and being part of boards, can you share a moment that you found yourself being particularly impactful?
Yeah, so I had a couple of boards that I was involved with as chair that went through significant transition, both board transition and executive leadership transition. And so as chair, when you are going through that is a lot of work in terms of managing that journey, and especially as a volunteer. They were both volunteer boards. And so, we had to do executive recruitment. We had to rethink the composition of the board. In one case, it was around getting a more diverse board. In another case, it was moving from a representative board to much more of a strategic board. And then we had to put new leadership in place to align with where the board was trying to go. And so I had to step in to operations, which is not where you want to be as chair, but you need to do that when you don't have a leader that's dealing with the operations. So, I'm very proud of where those organizations are now, and the fact that putting in that extra time, because it is a lot of time, you need to lean in, you need to spend time. And I think when you take on any role on a board, you need to think about, if something goes wrong, do I have the time that would be required to lean in? It's a lot easier to serve on a board when things are going sort of according to plan and everything is smooth sailing. But I think pandemic would be another perfect example of where boards really had to step in and lean in a different way. And so really thinking about what that looks like. So in my case with those two boards, to have spent the time and then to look at where they got to and see the value of those journeys is where I've made, for me, the most impact.
That's fascinating and quite the challenge. That's great,
Yes.
Kendra. Let's talk about the value and the skills that you find that you bring most to your boards.
Yeah, so the one that gets me really excited these days is around technology and innovation. And so really trying to think about how we leverage technology and think differently. And so I've participated in some of those conversations. And one of my most exciting moments was actually when one of the board chairs said, I don't know what we're going to do. We have no financial skills on our board. And I said, well, by the way, I happen to be a CPA. So that was really exciting. And the other one, I think increasingly, which I'm seeing now in my role, is around climate. And so, how do we invest in climate? How do we make a difference? How do we think differently in terms of what it is that we're doing and how we are making our own contribution in the whole ESG conversation? So those are ones I think that will continue to be increasingly important and really exciting conversations for me.
And so as we wrap up, one last piece of advice or takeaway that you would give to our audience today.
Yeah, so I think when you're thinking about the boards that you want to serve on, or when you're presented with board opportunities, it's really important to think through whether or not, why you would take the why of why you would get involved. And certainly for me, I have learned there are certain skills in my day job, I don't actually want to be bringing to a board. I want to be doing something different. So what are the types of skills that you want to be developing and bringing to a board? What are the types of roles? So even though I'm, an accountant by background, a treasurer role for me is way too hands-on in terms of what I want to be doing. So what is the type of role? And recognize that whatever you're going to do, you need to put your energy into it. You need to put your heart and soul into it, especially if you're taking on a not-for-profit role. And so be discerning, because you never know where the people that you work with on a board end up. And people recognize when you're not putting the time and effort in that's actually required. So make sure that you take on a board that you are actually going to put the time and effort in, or wait for the next one.
Great pieces of advice. Thank you. Well, this has been fascinating. Really enjoyed our discussion, and I'm sure that your insights and input will be just as valuable to others as they're starting on their journey and making their way through. Thanks again, Kendra.
Thank you.